Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another Breakfast with Blaha. And today I'm having fat-free Greek yogurt, frozen cherries, and almond butter. All right, let's talk about tracking our progress on accessory lifts. Now, I routinely rotate accessory movements to the point where it's funny because you get people who are like, you're flip-flopping on your lifts. Well, I don't even think that's an insult, really. Because we should be rotating our supplemental lifts relatively often for a number of reasons. Number one, prevents overuse. Number two, we get more complete hypertrophy. Right, we should be changing them fairly often. And I've made videos discussing already when to change them. I'll probably have to make more in the future on different rules on when you can change these movements. But we do need to rotate through them. And that includes when we're doing a couple different lifts for a muscle group, because we should be. Again, something I always say, the best exercise for any muscle is to do two different good exercises. Right? We should be trying to hit every muscle from a couple different angles. But when we rotate these movements, and let's say we have a slot, let's say we have two chest press slots, or two hip hinge slots, or two rowing slots, or mid-back slots of some type in our workouts, and we rotate those movements, put a different movement into that slot. People will say, well, how do we keep up with that? If we're changing them all the time, how do we know we're progressing? Well, part of that question shows a novice mindset, because novices are used to just progressing on the same exercises for 6 months straight. Doesn't happen when you get more advanced. Sorry guys, that's not going to happen again. Enjoy that during your novice phase, because it's never going to happen again. Barring muscle memory, long downtime from training, or upping your dose. And upping your dose can mean whatever you want that to mean. Whatever you want that to mean. Going from 0 to anything is upping your dose, for example. But other than those situations, it's not going to happen. But what we should be looking for is a general upward trend. You know, I've had people say, well, how do we track maxes? On a spreadsheet. So if you look at the conjugate system, and we max on different lifts all the time, and we very rarely hit the exact same lift more than once every 12 weeks, right? You can track them on a spreadsheet. You know what your best maxes are. I track them by date, so even if we don't get a max, we don't PR, I know what I hit on that day. I can go back and reference it, any of those lifts. Well, can't you do the same thing? And I'm not saying we need to do it by date. That would get tedious for your supplemental work. But can't you just track it all on a spreadsheet? And again, this is one of the perks of using tens. This is, again, I like using tens for most of this stuff. And then going up higher only to see if we need to add more weight. In other words, if you can do 12 reps, you probably need to add weight. But if we're sticking to mostly tens for our supplemental work, we no longer have to track a dozen different things for each lift. We know what our best 10 rep sets are, or our 10 rep maxes at any given time. So here's what you do. Let's say that you've been doing the pause bench. You've been doing a pause bench, normal pause bench with a straight bar. And you've been getting you got up to 225 for 10 and it's stalled or whatever, and you need to rotate it. So you go over to a buffalo bar pause bench, or a football bar pause bench for that slot. Okay, and you get that up to maybe you start with those at 210, and you build those up to 225 for 10. Then you rotate to the next one of those three and do the same thing, right? And maybe it lasts for 3 or 4 weeks, and you go back to that pause bench again. If you kept notes and you knew that you were doing 10 reps with 225, so that way you kept up with your 10 rep maxes, or your best 10 rep sets, if you can still come in and do 225 for 10s the first day back, you haven't lost any strength, and then if you can add any weight, you can progress. In other words, if you keep up with your best on those, even if it's been a couple months, 2 months, 3 months, or whatever since you did that variation, if you gained muscle and strength, you should not regress on that lift. And if you do, it should only be for one workout, and then you're back to where you were, and then you're making progress again. As long as you know what you were lifting on all these other variations, when you rotate one back in, you can do this. You can do it for everything. Whether you're rowing, let's say you do pendlay rows. Let's say you do standing rows. Let's say you do, bent over row. Let's say you do seal rows. Let's say you do snatch grip pendlay rows. Let's say maybe those are your 4 rows you rotate through. And maybe you rotate through them every 3 weeks. And you try to progress as much as you can. So with 4 of those, you're going to go 9 weeks without doing any one of those lifts again. But if you tracked how much pounds you were doing, how many kilos, guess what? You can tell if you're progressing or not, because you try to progress on each individual lift. And as long as you're seeing progressive overload on any of these lifts, you know you're getting bigger. If you add a new lift in, we can always add weight the next session, even if it was hard. But can you do it for a 3rd session? If you can do it for a 3rd session, you know we're gaining muscle. And if you can progress on that lift for 3 weeks straight and it still stays challenging, and let's say over that 3 weeks, you're able to add 10 total pounds to your 10 rep sets, you know that you're progressing. And then when you swap to the next exercise, you can follow the same trend. All right, you can follow the same trend. And because you're just swapping different movements in those slots. Now, it can become a little problematic if we have to change our form. But then you need to just note the better form. Like let's say you're doing a new form, like you weren't pausing correctly, or you were doing a partial or whatever. Like I was doing for a bit. I was stopping right below the knee on Romanian deadlifts and realized, hey, I need to go a lot deeper. I had to take weight off the bar. So I had to kind of cancel those out and say, hey, these other ones don't count. I need to only be tracking the correct range of motion to where you almost reach the floor. And so sometimes we have to adjust for that. And what we should be seeing is an upward trend year after year after year. Now, that isn't true for a couple of reasons of why. Number one, we get hurt, we get an injury. I had a lot of regressions when I had that shoulder impingement from pull-ups. I had a lot of regression on a lot of lifts that I've been having to build back up. What about if you do a cut? You do a big cut. It's one thing if you do a small cut. It's another reason I'm saying more and more we need to do really small bulks. Not short in time, but smaller in total weight gain plotted over time. And that's the direction I'll be going in the future from here on out. Because if you have to cut a bunch of weight, if you have to cut 20 pounds, okay, those lifts are going to go down and they may not come back up for a long time. Right? So we may have to readjust all of our stuff. You might need a new chart post-cut. You might have to redo your spreadsheets for that. But the point is, you can track these things successfully, and it's very easy to ensure that you're getting progressive overload, even if you rotate lifts by just keeping up with what you're doing. And actually, if you changed lifts every single week, which I don't recommend, but you have 4 different lifts for that slot, as long as you track each of those and you know where you were and you see progress, then you know that you're getting progressive overload. And again, you just track your 10 rep sets. It's very simple. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.